What I said was, I beg to differ with Draymond's approach tonight. Those were my exact words. I don't know how somebody misconstrued that. It's modern life. Everything's recorded. Everything is filmed. I've decided I'm now going to get a giant laminated board with all of my play calls, and I'm going to turn into an NFL coach from here on out.
Kind of hate that part of modern life. All right, Warrior Steve Kerr downplaying the Draymond Green criticism, using humor, obviously, there, that the lip readers were wrong. Max, what did you think of Kerr's reaction?
I actually thought that was huge. I think Kerr is a really underrated coach. And, you know, Phil Jackson, there was always this raging debate. Is he one of the greatest coaches of all time, or is he just overrated? And anyone with Jordan and Pippen and then Shaq and Kobe, or Kobe and Powell could win. I don't care who you got. 11 rings, everyone. Stop. Stop. At this level, the kind of psychology of the team and the way a coach handles that is at least half the job. Look, do the Warriors know how to play? Does Kerr's system work? Stephen A., you give Mark Jackson a lot of credit for bringing them along. Absolutely, he deserves that credit. But when the Warriors made that move, and guys like Iguodala were mad about it, by the way, right? Because Mark Jackson had gotten the Splash Brothers to believe in themselves, called them the greatest shooters ever, like early on. But the team wasn't moving the ball. And Kerr came in and unlocked an offensive potential there. They were, you know, the ball doesn't stick with anyone. They play. It's one of the reasons Kevin Durant wanted to play there. Like, that's the way basketball should be played. So his system works. We know these guys can play. We know they have the talent. So when something goes wrong, what goes wrong? It's managing egos, boredom. You mentioned Stephen A. rising to the level of competition. So to get caught on video saying he's tired of Draymond's you-know-what, and then to respond to the media, no, they got the lip reading wrong. What I said was, I beg to differ with Draymond's approach tonight. Not only does that perfectly handle the situation and put it to bed and point out without even him having to say it, but he said it. Guys, this is basket NBA, man. This happens on every team all the time. No big deal. But it handles it in the best possible way. If people think it's just easy to be a coach of a really talented team, ask Brad Stevens this year. It's not so easy. But Steve Kerr makes it look easy. He is a great and underrated coach, and he just gave you an example why.
He's a phenomenal coach. He's a phenomenal coach, and one would argue an even better person. He's one of the most kind and more decent people that you'd ever come across in this profession, and I'm honored to be covering him. Let me say this. It was never a big deal to me, and it has nothing to do with his reaction. It has everything to do, if you know anything about sports and you know anything about playing basketball particularly, that's virtually nothing. Now, the interesting part is not about Steve Kerr. It's how Draymond Green takes it. It's how Draymond Green absorbs it and what Draymond Green will react to it. But what Steve Kerr said, it was caught, you know, by some lip reader saying, I assure you, coaches have said and done far worse. See, we live in a different age, Molly. See, when I was playing college ball, I got slapped upside my head, physically, by Coach Clarence Big House Gates, along with various others, unapologetically. And we wouldn't even think to say anything about to him or about it. It was par for the course. Don't get me started with the kind of things that John Chaney has said to some people. You know, say the George Ravelins of the world, 40 Minutes of Hell, Nolan Richardson, John Thompson. Oh, my God. Have you sat down and had a conversation with John Thompson? And I brought up the black coaches for a reason, because they're very, very bad in that regard, or good, depending on how you interpret it. And some white coaches are just as bad as well. I mean, everybody couldn't be Dean Smith or come across as polished, you know, and professional as Mike Krzyzewski. I mean, when you think about Bobby Knight, please understand, as extreme as he was to so many people, particularly in this day and age, we're like, damn, you actually could get in trouble for that? Because, I mean, this is what we ran across a lot, because it was that crazy. So having said all of that, let's look at Steve Kerr's resume. He's an 8-time champion. He's got 5 rings as a player, 3 as a coach. And if Mike D'Antoni had listened to him and brought in Tom Thibodeau as his defensive wizard as a coach, he might have had 9 or 10 championships with that crew that they had back in the day. Max, you appreciate this? Mari Stoudemire, Joe Johnson, Sean Marion, and these brothers could have won the title. I mean, if they had somebody This is what Steve Kerr wanted when he was the GM. So not only is he a champion as a player, not only is he a champion as a coach, he probably might have been a champion as a general manager as well. So when we hear something like this, I appreciate the fact that he's joking, because he could have been serious and said this. Do y'all know who I am? Do you realize that this is nothing? Will y'all shut the hell up and go and stop wasting my time with this nonsense and come out with something more substantive? He could have said that.
You bring up the racial component of it, which I find interesting, because
I was just saying it.
But actually, I think there is one here. Right. You know, Jalen Rose brought up earlier that when you're a kid, who's in the stands changes. The racial composition of the people in the stands. By the time you get to the NBA, it went from when you were in high school, a lot of black people to a lot of white people by the time you're in the pros, right? And there are jokes in American culture about the fact that there's like usually a white coach and whoever's on the floor at the time, 5 black players, you know, African-American players, although that's changed in the NBA a bit with the influx of players from Europe and South America. But Steve Kerr, when he took over that team, took over from whom? Mark Jackson, an African-American coach. Players, I mentioned Iguodala, like Iguodala, had a problem with it partly along racial lines and said so. Said so in articles. You can read them. They're online. You know, like, yeah, I had, you know. And Steve Kerr had to figure out a way to gain the trust of his players, to be a guy whose system they could buy into, to be the kind of personality that wore well over time. Remember, he didn't just learn under Phil Jackson, also Greg Popovich. And the way he handled this, like you say, oh, it's no big deal, whatever, this happens all the time. But I could see a coach mishandling this and this turning into a bigger deal with Draymond. Sure. The way he handled this totally diffuses it. If you're Draymond Green and you hear your coach do that, it's like, right, it doesn't matter.
To piggyback off your point, though, I think it's important to point this out. Steph Curry deserves a boatload of credit, because when you have a star like Steph Curry, who is the face of your franchise, who buys in, it makes it easier to sell to everybody. Like, for example, Greg Popovich. Let me tell you something, and I've often said this, and I've said this affectionately, not insultingly in any way. Greg Popovich, at least years ago, was one of, you looked at him as a big phony from the perspective. He is incredibly nice and decent. This guy that you see, this acerbic personality, you know, talking to reporters during the game because he doesn't want to be bothered while the game is going on. If you sit down and you talk to Greg Popovich, you'd be hard-pressed to find a better man. He's that special kind of a guy. But guess what? It helped that when he wanted to be acerbic, when he wanted to be a bit truculent or whatever, it was Tim Duncan he could get on, and Tim Duncan would take it. Because if Tim Duncan took it, what excuse does anybody else have not to take it? And that was what they got help. When you're helped by your superstar, it matters.
The best coaches on the greatest dynasties usually have a captain on the floor that's an extension of them in some way. And one of the issues with the Celtics right now, and we've been into it, is obviously, Coach wanted that to be Gordon Hayward, right? But in fact, it's Kyrie, and I think that team is figuring it out right now.
Years ago, Larry Brown, one of his tussles with Allen Iverson, benches Allen Iverson. That night, Greg Popovich benched Tim Duncan for no reason. And Tim Duncan didn't say a word, because Popovich was looking out for his boy, Larry Brown, showing how it could be done when you have a superstar. Allen Iverson and everybody else in the NBA, it didn't escape any of us.
Yeah, but Kerr playing it perfectly and stopped it from escalating publicly. So good job by him, as always. Russell Westbrook and a Jazz fan got into a pretty heated verbal altercation. What should the NBA do next? Will Kane will join the debate desk.
Yeah, he was lucky he had a Tim Duncan.